Dear students, welcome to my lockdown office once more, to the colorful world of qualitative research. This section will be about how do you approach analyzing your coded data. We are here to provide you with a bit of background on how you can use what you have learned with the technique of Atlas TI in a scientific way. By now, Atlas TI has helped you in a big way because you have coded data, you have done correlations, you have probably already done a network view, so you have beautiful results on screen. But that what you see there on screen is not your complete analysis in qualitative research. What you actually still have to do is frame these results in the bigger scope of your overall research. And that takes quite a few steps of analytical thinking. There is a lot of theory in this field of how to interpret qualitative data, and it's a complex field. So I thought, for pragmatic purposes, to introduce this theory through a practical example. And a practical example is the demo case of my own master's research when I was an emerging student in qualitative research. And I will take you through all the steps of the research journey into analysis. And I hope this example will explain a few things. In qualitative research, we start by positioning ourselves subjectively with our motivation for the research. We have to make transparent how we relate to the topic. Why do we want to do this piece of research? Now, my piece of research at the time was around the question of how can I contribute with my research to a more humane hospital care, humanization of hospital care. I was motivated because I had spent a lot of time as a child visiting relatives in hospital, and I'd seen a lot and thought some things could be done better. This, as a master's student, in my orientation phase of my research, helped me a great deal to select literature. In the literature around hospital care at that time, I found it very interesting that it was mostly research that represented the point of view from the medical doctors. And from that theoretical background, from what I was reading, I deducted some of the core concepts, the core ideas that kept recurring in the literature. And these actually became my first deductive codes. A deductive code, in other words, to remind you, is the codes that you derive from the theory and the already existing research. So these are not the codes that you will find later when you have collected data. The deductive codes that I found at that stage were that doctors were mostly saying that they were short of hospital beds and that the hospitals needed to expand their facilities. What was also a recurring theme was that they spoke about understaffing. They also mentioned quite a lot that there was financial pressure that made it difficult to do everything they needed to do. And then also from a different aspect, they mentioned that they were very irritated by errors made in medical files. Remember, this was before everything was computerized. But what was very interesting in that orientation phase is that I could not find any research done from the patient's point of view. So I thought, this is the research gap for me. I am going to do my research from the patient's point of view. Next phase is tailoring phase in your research. So once I knew I've spotted a gap, I could begin to think, how am I going to approach collecting the views of the patients on hospital care? I obviously had to choose my methodology. So as my methodology, I selected 2 hospitals. I asked for permission to approach the patients, and through all kinds of guided procedures, I ended up collecting my data at the bedside of patients, having lengthy, in-depth interviews with them. It was an important observation for later on analyzing my data that at no point in time a patient refused to speak to me. As a matter of fact, These interviews turned out much more lengthy than I ever thought they would, and I assembled lots of notes, all boxed in handwritten files of the interviews. A mass of information that I thought with every interview, how on earth am I ever going to get through all this information encoded? Yes, this was before the days that Atlas TI was on the scene, so it all had to be done manually. So when it came to coding my data, I had millions of pieces. I could have plastered my whole wall with it. But as we go through coding, and you have done that already with Atlas TI, you come quickly to a point that you begin to see particular groups of codes and emerging themes. And all the detail of what I found in my research is now not so important for you, but as a demo case, I just wanted to highlight that most of the inductive codes, because we're now in the field of the inductive codes, they come out of my own data. The patient spoke a lot about the doctors not having enough time, the doctors not making eye contact, the doctors not giving them any information, the doctors rather looking at their watch than at their patients, the doctors being sometimes rude, always in a hurry, something that began to cluster around the theme of what are the bedside manners of the doctors. The patients also spoke a lot about the nurses. They spoke more positively about the nurses, saying the nurses are always in a hurry and there don't seem to be enough nurses, but they are more friendly with us. They observe us more, they know more about us, but they are not allowed to give us information. And then other codes, other themes that I coded, which did nowhere appear in any research that I had read before, from the doctor's point of view. Of course, the patient spoke about being lonely, experiencing fear, and being bothered by the noises in a hospital.